All right, hello, seventh period. So this is the second segment of your reading homework. So this is the second segment is starting on page 26. So second segment starting on page 26. Don't forget that for your reading quiz, you need to know who the people are and what they do. So just keep that in mind, and don't forget to do summary every 2 pages. All right. Okay, page 26. I'm actually going to start a little bit on page 25 so I can read a complete sentence. Okay. The prisoners they were now dressed in all their rags, tying around with all their bits of string, and their faces wrapped in rags from chin to eyes to protect them from the cold, were lying on their bunks on top of their blankets, with their boots on, quite still, and with their eyes closed. Just a few seconds more until the gang boss would yell, "Fall out!" Nearly all the men in Barracks 9, including Gang 104, were dozing. Only the assistant gang boss, Pablo, was busy moving his lips as he counted something with the help of a small pencil. And on a top bunk, the Baptist Alicia, Shukov's neighbor, neat and cleanly washed, was reading in his notebook in which he had half the Gospels copied down. Shukov raced in but didn't make a sound and went to Pavlo's bunk. Pavlo raised his head. "Didn't they put you in the cooler, Ivan Denisovich? And are you still alive?" They simply couldn't teach Western Ukrainians to change their ways. Even in camp, they were polite to people and addressed them by their full name. Pavlo handed him his bread ration from the table. There was a little white heap of sugar on top of it. He was in great hurry, but he answered just as politely. Even an assistant gang boss is a big shot of sorts, and more depends on him than on the commandant. Commandant. So commandant is like a bigger leader. Assistant gang boss is like a smaller scale leader. He scooped up the sugar with his lips, licked the bread clean with his tongue, and put one leg on the ledge to climb up and make his bed. He looked at the ration, turning it, weighing it in his hand as he moved, to see if it was the full pound due to him. Shukov had had thousands of these rations in prisons and camps, and though he had never had a chance to weigh a single one of them on a scale, and he was always too shy to stick up for his rights, he and every other prisoner had known a long time that the people who cut up and issued your bread wouldn't last long if they gave you honest rations. Every ration was short. The only question was by how much. So you checked every day to set your mind at rest, hoping you hadn't been too badly treated. Perhaps my ration is almost full weight today. Okay, so guys, you should pick up on the leaders at this camp. They deprive people of food. They don't give people the full ration. It's about half an ounce short, Shukov figured, and he broke the bread in two. He stuck half inside his clothes into his jacket, where he'd sewed in a little pocket. The factory makes prison jackets without pockets. He thought of eating the other half, the one he hadn't eaten at breakfast, right away, but food eaten quickly isn't food. It does no good. It doesn't fill you. He made a move to shove his half ration in a locker, but changed his mind again. He remembered the orderlies had already been beaten up twice for thieving. The barracks was as public as the courtyard of an apartment building. So not letting go of the bread, Ivan Denisovich pulled his feet out of his felt boots, neatly leaving his foot cloths and spoon inside them, climbed up barefooted, widened the little hole in his mattress, and hid the other half of his rations in the sawdust. He snatched his cap off his head, pulled the needle and thread out of it. This, too, was hidden carefully because they also checked the prisoners' caps at inspection. Once a warder had pricked himself on the needle and had been so angry he'd almost smashed Shukov's head in. The 3 quick stitches, and he had sewed up the hole where the ration was hidden, so he's hiding some of his food. Meanwhile, the sugar in his mouth had melted. Shukov's whole body was tense. At any moment, the work controller would start yelling in the doorway. Shukov's fingers moved like lightning while his mind was running ahead, thinking what he had to do next. The Baptist was reading the Gospels, not just to himself, but almost aloud. Maybe this was for Shukov's benefit. These Baptists loved to spread a little propaganda. "But let none of you suffer as a murderer, as a thief, or as an evildoer, as a busybody in other men's matters. Yet if any man suffer as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God on this behalf." One great thing about Alosha was that he was so clever at hiding this book in a hole in the wall that it hadn't been found on any of the searches. With the same swift movements, Shukov hung his overcoat on a crossbeam, and from under the mattress he put out his mittens, a pair of thin foot cloths, a bit of rope, and a piece of rag with 2 tapes. He evened the sawdust in his mattress. Little, the stuff was heavy and hard packed. Tucked in his blanket all around, threw his pillow into place, then climbed down barefooted and started putting on his foot wrappings. First his good new foot cloths, and then on the top ones that weren't so good. Then the gang boss cleared his throat loudly, got up and shouted, "Snap out of it! 104! Outside!" Right away, everyone in the gang, whether snoozing or not, yawned and made for the door. The gang boss had been in camps for 19 years, and he wouldn't chase you out to the roll call 1 second too early. When he said outside, the time had really come. As the men filed out without a word, clumping their feet first into the corridor and then through the entryway, and so to the steps, and after the boss of Gang 20 had also yelled outside, the same way as Taran, Shukov managed to put on his felt boots over his 2 pairs of footcloths. Then he put his overcoat over his jacket and tied it tightly with the rope. Leather belts were taken away from prisoners. They weren't allowed in special camps. Shukov finished all his chores and caught up with the last of the men in the entryway as they filed through the door and out the steps. Bulky, wearing everything they had, they edged out in a single file. And nobody was in a hurry to get out first. They trudged toward the yard, and you could only hear the crunch of their boots. It was still dark, though the sky in the east was getting bright and looked kind of green. A nasty little wind was blowing. This was the toughest moment. When you lined up for roll call in the morning into the bitter cold and the darkness with an empty belly for the whole day, you'd lost the use of your tongue. You didn't want to talk anymore. Now near the perimeter, a deputy work controller was going frantic. Well, Taran, how long are we supposed to wait, dragging your feet again, eh? Maybe Shukov was frightened of him, but not Taran. He wouldn't waste his breath on him in this cold, and he just trudged on without a word. The gang came after him over the snow, tramp, tramp, crunch, crunch, crunch. So Taran is like, he's like the leader of like their group in the concentration camp. The boss must have slipped the fellow 2 pounds of fat back. You could see from the other gangs nearby that the Gang 104 was being lined up in its usual place. It was only the other social poor suckers who'd be marched off to the socialist community development. God, it would be hell there today with a temperature of 16 below and the wind and no cover at all. The boss needed a lot of fat back to slip to the people in the PPS and still have enough left for his own belly. He didn't get any packages from home, but he was never short of fat back. It was always handed over to him right away by anyone in the gang who got some. That was the only way you could live. The chief controller made a note on his board. Taran, you have 1 sick today and 23 to go out, right? 23, the boss nodded. Who was missing? Pantalev wasn't there. But was he sick? And right away there was a lot of whispering in the gang. Pantalev, the son of a bitch, had managed to get out of it again. He wasn't sick at all. The security officer had kept him behind. He'd be squealing on somebody again. They could easily send for him in the daytime, keep him there 3 hours if they liked, and nobody would be the wiser. They worked it through the sick list. The whole yard was black with prisoners' coats, and the gang shuffled forward to be frisked. Shukov remembered that he wanted to get the number on his jacket redone and made his way over to the other side of the yard. There was a couple of men waiting in the front of the artist. Shukov joined them. Their number tags were nothing but trouble. Okay, guys, go ahead and do your sticky note summary for pages 30 and 31. All right, you do your sticky note summary right there, and then I will keep going. Keep going now. Page 32. The warders could spot you a long way off, and the guards could write the number down when you did something wrong. And if you didn't have it redone, they'd put you in the cooler for not looking after it properly. There were 3 of these artists in the camp. They painted pictures free for the higher-ups and also took turns painting numbers at roll call. Today it was the old man with the little gray beard when he painted the number on your cap. It was like a priest anointing your brow. He'd paint a little and then a little more and breathe on his fingertips. His knitted mittens were thin and his hands went stiff with cold so he couldn't make the numbers. The artist gave Shukov a new S854 on his jacket, and Shukov, with his rope belt in his hand, not bothering to fasten up his coat because they weren't far from the friskers, went back to his gang. And he noticed at once there was another fellow from his gang. Caesar was smoking, not his pipe but a cigarette, which meant there was a chance of catching a smoke. But Shukov didn't ask him outright. He stopped just next to Caesar, turned halfway toward him, and looked past him. He looked past as if he didn't care, but he could see how after every drag, Caesar was thinking about something and he wasn't taking many drags, the rim of red ash moving along the cigarette and burned it down nearer and nearer to the holder. Okay, that's the end of page 32. I'm going to start my third segment on page 33. All right, so if you want to keep doing the audio version, you can look up the third segment. God bless you.